They told you it's burnout. They lied. It's nurse trauma. Your body never lied. The system did. I'm Dr. Lorre Laws. Let's heal the real root cause. Welcome back to It's Not Burnout, It's Trauma. I'm Dr. Lorre Laws, and this is episode 88. After last week's episode, my inbox broke, and that's a good thing, a very good thing. Thank you to all of you who reached out. Open invitation for everyone else to do the same. I received over 200 messages from nurses all across the country from various practice settings: ICU, ED, med-surg, psych, L&D, school nurses, travel nurses, retired nurses who left over a decade ago and are still carrying the impact of nurse-specific trauma in their bodies. Every single message had the same theme for the same type of story. And it goes something like this. I advocated for my patients. I followed my state's Nurse Practice Act, and I followed all the organizational policies. And then I got punished for it. 3 of those messages stopped me cold. A med-surg nurse with 8 patients instead of 6, with 2 drips running and 1 person going septic. And they were written up because the med pass was 20 minutes late. Now, mind you, she was down the hall responding to one of her other patients' code. She received a write-up and a current slip, and then her hospital posted record profits for that quarter. Another nurse messaged and told the story about how they worked in long-term care and had reported a family member who had been hitting and choking a resident. The director of that long-term care facility told the staff to recant their witness statements. The nurse who filed the report was terminated within 2 weeks for an unrelated documentation technicality. And then there's the story of a third nurse who escalated egregious violations to state and federal regulators when their leadership ignored repeated reports of unsafe practice. Within days, their assignment changed, the schedule shifted, and not for the better. And when they pressed for answers from leadership, there were none to be found. These are not outlier situations. These are not disgruntled employees. They are experienced, licensed professionals who did exactly what the Nurse Practice Act, the ANA Code of Ethics, and the Joint Commission standards require of them. And then they were punished for it. And today, I'm going to tell you why. There's a business model that is designed to keep you broken. I used a phrase in a podcast interview recently, and it landed with nurses worldwide. 3 words: traumatize to monetize. It landed because it is the truth that no one in healthcare is willing to say out loud. The system needs nurses generating revenue. It needs them at the bedside, moving patients through, documenting, billing, coding, discharging. The math is simple. More patients per nurse equals more revenue per shift. Fewer resources per unit equals lower overhead. Higher throughput equals higher profit margins. And the single most effective way to keep the linchpin of all health professionals in the building compliant, productive, and silent? Well, it's to keep them traumatized. Keeping the nurses traumatized, not stressed, traumatized. I've been monitoring the data for nearly a decade now. Hundreds of nurses have taken the free nurse trauma assessment, and the data confirms what your body already knows. The overwhelming majority of trauma reported is not from patient death or clinical tragedy. I'm not talking about vicarious or secondary trauma here, or trauma from disasters. That comes with the profession. I'm talking about the trauma from the system itself. System-induced trauma, insufficient resource trauma, staffing decisions, retaliation, institutional betrayal, the traumas that are entirely avoidable and entirely manufactured. Now, Dr. Karen Foley's middle range theory for nurse psychological trauma spells it all out. This is science, not woo-woo, not burnout. The system is weaponizing your midbrain, your vagus nerve, and your autonomic nervous system against you. Why? Because a nurse trapped in survival mode doesn't challenge unsafe ratios. They do not file grievances. They do not organize. They do not whistleblow. They put their head down and they get through the shift because their nervous system has been hijacked into believing that compliance equals safety. Because a compliant nurse is a profitable nurse. A regulated nurse is a threat. And the system knows this. And now you know it too. And there's a pathway out. If you haven't listened to episode 85, take a quick listen. There I laid out the 4 forces converging on nurses right now. Today I'm going to show you how the machine connects all 4 of those forces. I like to call it the Polyvagal Trap. This is not a metaphor. This is neuroscience. When a nurse is locked into sympathetic overdrive, fight, flight, fawn, or freeze, their autonomic nervous system has shifted out of ventral vagal tone, out of their window of tolerance, where executive function, discernment, and clinical judgment live. Their prefrontal cortex goes offline. Then the amygdala takes over. The limbic system jumps in the driver's seat and flips the switch to turn on all the survival mode programs. And then when human error occurs under these impossible neurological conditions, the system weaponizes it. Write-ups, occurrences, threats to licensure or employment. The error that the system's own staffing model created becomes the individual nurse's fault. It's a high-stakes version of the carrot and stick leadership game. The system creates the conditions that compromise clinical judgment. Then it punishes the nurse for the predictable result. And the punishment itself is another trauma that drives the nurse deeper into survival mode, which produces more compliance, which generates more profit. Traumatize to monetize. Welcome to the underbelly of healthcare. But you don't have to stay here. Now, before I get into the 5-step playbook that the system is running on you, I want to make sure you have the full picture. Everything I'm talking about today, the neuroscience of how trauma lives in our nervous system, the polyvagal framework, the difference between burnout and trauma, well, I wrote an entire book about it called Nursing Our Healer's Heart. If you want to go deeper, you can download a free chapter right from my website, drlorelaws.com/chapter. It walks you through exactly why traditional self-care fails and what exactly works. Now, let's get back to that playbook. The playbook and the pruning. There's a 5-step playbook called the Traumatize to Monetize Playbook. The healthcare industry will tell you that trauma, well, it's just an inherent part of nursing, that patient death and suffering are simply the cost of caring. And honestly, some of that is true. That's vicarious and secondary stress trauma. That is inherent with the profession of nursing. Losing a patient will always hurt. Witnessing suffering always leaves a mark. Those traumas are woven into the sacred weight of the work that we do, and no one enters the profession expecting otherwise. But those are not the traumas that are breaking you or driving nurses from the profession. Those traumas, the ones that are breaking you, well, they have an operating manual. And if you've worked in a hospital for more than a year, then you already know every step. Or if you've been a nurse for a few years or more, it translates into every specialty and nearly every practice setting. The system has a 5-step Traumatize to Monetize playbook, and it runs in nearly every healthcare system in this country. Step 1, understaff the unit. Run the numbers to maximize the number of patients that move through with minimum labor cost. Call it efficiency. Call it resource optimization. Call it whatever helps the board of directors to sleep at night. Step 2, overload the nurse. Let's do 8 patients when the evidence says 6 is safe. Let's have 2 drips running, a sepsis with a patient swirling and a new admission rolling through the door and 2 discharges and imminent orders. No backup, no float pool to catch the emergencies that put patients in the hospital in the first place, and no option to say no. Step 3, just wait for the air, not if, but when. Because under these neurological practice conditions, error is not a possibility. It's a certainty. Dr. Karen Foley's research at Purdue identifies these as avoidable nurse-specific traumas, system-induced, resource-driven, and manufactured by policy that is sustained by our silence. Step 4, blame the nurse. The med was late. The assessment was missed. The documentation had a gap. Write it up. File that occurrence report. Threaten their job, their license, and make sure they understand that the failure belongs to them and not the system and not our staffing model that all but guaranteed this would happen. Step 5, rinse and repeat. The nurse is now deeper in survival mode, more compliant, less likely to challenge, less likely to file a grievance or organize collectively or whistleblow. From the system's perspective, tick the box. Mission accomplished. This is not just a conspiracy theory. This is a business operating model. And every nurse listening right now just recognized their last few months or years in it. So what happens when you do push back? Well, not surprisingly, the system has a retaliation model, and every experienced nurse has already memorized it, not because anyone handed it to them, but because they watched it happen to the nurse before them, and the one before that, and the one before that. It goes something like this. You advocate for your patients, then you get labeled difficult. You file a complaint, and then you get written up for something unrelated. You refuse an unsafe assignment, and then you get floated to a unit where you have never worked, have no training or background. Then you escalate to compliance. Your schedule changes overnight. Your PTO gets denied. You get moved to night shift. And then your colleagues stop making eye contact because they have learned that proximity to a whistleblower is a career risk. You are not fired. You are dismantled slowly, methodically, until you leave on your own. This is how the system is driving experienced nurses from the profession. And then leadership files your departure under voluntary resignation, and the institution never has to answer for what it did. This is not theory. In 2025, a California jury awarded Chief Nursing Officer $27.5 million after finding unanimously that a major health organization retaliated against her for reporting unsterilized surgical instruments and patient safety failures. Several jurors hugged her after the verdict. Some of them were in tears. This is what it is worth when one nurse stands up to tell the truth inside one of the largest healthcare systems in the country. That same spring, a nurse and union leader in Massachusetts was fired after linking inadequate staffing to 3 patient deaths on a podcast. The hospital called their comments disloyal, reckless, and maliciously untrue. But days earlier, federal regulators had placed that same hospital in immediate jeopardy for the exact conditions that nurse described. The regulators confirmed what the nurse said, and the hospital fired them for saying it anyway. These are not outliers. These are the ones who had the energy and the resources to fight back, the ones with union representation, or the stamina to endure a 5-week trial, or the resources to not have an income for weeks or even months. For every nurse who makes the news, tens of thousands more are quietly dismantled and walk away with nothing more than a shattered nervous system and a story that no one will publish. This is pruning, and it's surgical. It leads us to this double bind. It's a no-win, no-win situation for nurses. The first no-win is to stay silent while your nervous system deteriorates. The trauma compounds, the dissociation deepens. Your body keeps the score, whether or not you report those dangerous conditions or not. You are stuck in survival mode, sympathetic overdrive, the freeze, fight, flight, couch rotting, socially isolating because the mitochondria literally cannot produce enough energy to sustain the ongoing traumatization. And then here's the second no-win. If you speak up, then the system retaliates. Write-ups, occurrences, investigations, lateral violence from colleagues who have been conditioned to see advocacy as a threat to their own survival. Both roads lead to leaving either your role or the profession altogether. And this is not accidental. This is how you prune a workforce of its most dangerous members, the experienced nurses, not dangerous to patients, dangerous to profits. The nurses who see clearly, who advocate loudly, who refuse dangerous assignments, who file complaints, who organize, who whistleblow. Those are the nurses that the system cannot afford to keep. Why? Because a nurse who has reclaimed their nervous system regulation is a nurse who can no longer be controlled and manipulated. Now, the system, we hear all the time, the system is broken. The system is broken. Well, to be honest with you, the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as it's designed. Traumatize to monetize. Keep the workforce in survival mode. Extract maximum productivity. Prune the ones who resist. Replace them with new grads who are too inexperienced to know what they are walking into. Rinse and repeat. You are never supposed to thrive inside the system because thriving would make you ungovernable. But here's what the system did not account for. Your nervous system regulation being the resistance. Everything I discussed in episode 86 is still true. When you regulate your nervous system, you reclaim full access to your prefrontal cortex, to your optimal executive function, to your optimal discernment and clinical judgment, and importantly, to your voice. A regulated nurse is a nurse that can see the chessboard, who can advocate without being destabilized in their nervous system, who can refuse an unsafe assignment from a place of grounded clarity instead of reactive fear. The question is not whether you will heal. The question is whether you will let a system designed to break you succeed. If you have been retaliated against for advocating for your patients or your own safety, I want to know. If you've been written up, floated, schedule changed, denied PTO, forced to nights, or pushed out after speaking up, your story matters. Send me a message. Drop a comment in one of the socials. Send me a DM. I read and respond to every message personally. And if you know a nurse who is living inside this double bind, the no-win, no-win conundrum that we're in right now, please share this episode with them. They need to know that they are not alone and that they are not the problem. Are you ready to understand the real root cause? will take the free nurse trauma assessment at my website in under 2 minutes at drlorrelaws.com/assessment. You'll get a personalized report showing exactly how trauma is showing up in your life and what to do about it. From my healer's heart to yours, and until next time, namaste.